Hey guys, it's Kingdom Orange 2 here, and welcome back to my channel. So for my next video in this series, I wanted to talk about the Fairytale The Snow Queen, written by Hans Christian Andersen. And similar to some of my previous entries, I want to start by first telling the story of the fairytale itself, then comparing the franchises to it, and ending the video with my rankings. And just like always, if there's any Snow Queens you feel that I have missed, feel free to comment them down below. Okay, so with that all out of the way, let's get right to it. The Fairytale. So the Snow Queen opens with the devil, who has created a mirror that blocks out the good aspects of a human and magnifies their ugly ones. And when he and his fellow demons try to fly the mirror up to heaven, it ends up shattering, and shards from the glass spread around the world. Now many years later, the story shifts to a young boy and girl named Kay and Gerda, who live in a house next to each other. One day, a shard from the mirror ends up falling into Kay's heart and eye, causing him to become mean and aggressive to those around him. The following winter, Kay and his friends are out playing in the market when he decides to tie his tiny sled to a larger sleigh in order to take a bit of a joyride. His sleigh begins to pull Kay further and further out of the market, and when it finally stops, he realizes the sleigh is being driven by the Snow Queen, a mysterious woman his grandmother once warned him about. The Snow Queen brings Kay onto her sleigh and kisses him twice on the forehead, causing him to forget about Gerda and his family before taking him to her palace. Spring comes, and everyone now believes Kay has died in the river, so when Gerda goes to ask the river the truth, it instead carries her in her boat onto the shore of an old woman's house. This old woman turns out to be a sorceress who wants to keep Gerda there forever, and causes all of the roses in her garden to sink beneath the earth so that Gerda will forget all about Kay. However, after some time, Gerda eventually notices the rose on the old woman's hat and begins sobbing as roses remind her of Kay. The tears fall onto the soil, causing the roses to spring out, who tell Gerda that Kay is still alive, causing her to leave. Gerda comes across a crow who tells her that he believes Kay is in the princess's palace. However, when the two of them make it all of the way to the princess's bedroom, they discover that the prince isn't Kay, but just a man who looks very similar to him. Gerda sobbingly tells the royal couple her story, and the prince and princess take pity on her. They grant her a horse, carriage, servants, and a pair of new boots, then set her off on her way. During her journey, Gerda's carriage is ambushed by a group of robbers, but her life is spared by one of the group's little girls. In captivity, two animals speak to her. First, a dove tells Gerda that she saw Kay being carried away by the Snow Queen. Then, a reindeer named Bay says that he knows the way to Lapland since it's his home. The little girl then frees Gerda, and she and the reindeer then head north towards the Snow Queen's palace. On the way, they stop at a Finn woman's house who tells the reindeer that Gerda's innocent heart is the only way to break the Snow Queen's curse, but he can't tell her the truth because she will lose her innocence. Finally arriving at the palace, Gerda finds Kay playing with fragments of ice on the ground. If Kay is able to arrange these fragments into a particular word, the Snow Queen agreed to free him and give him a new pair of skates. Gerda runs up to Kay and kisses him, her warm tears melting the mirror splinter in his heart. As a result, Kay begins to cry, dislodging the splinter of glass from his eye and breaking the spell. As the two begin to dance, the splinters of ice spell the word eternity, solving the Snow Queen's puzzle and allowing Kay to be set free. The two of them leave the Snow Queen's castle, and the fairy tale ends with Kay and Gerda arriving back at home, but now grown up into adults. Barbie and the Pink Shoes. I never thought I'd have to revisit this horrible movie, but I guess here we are. Anyways, the Snow Queen in this film is the main villain and also the ruler of the ballet world. She begins to sense that something is going wrong with the ballets and discovers who is responsible for it. The Snow Queen then freezes Haley and takes her captive. Kristen finds the Snow Queen's castle, and the Snow Queen makes her dance under her command. However, she's finally defeated when Kristen goes off from the regular choreography and makes her own moves. Now, I can't seem to figure out why Mattel chose the Snow Queen to be the main villain of this movie, so maybe someone in the comments will know something I don't. Disney. In 2013, Walt Disney Animation Studios released their own version of the Snow Queen titled Frozen. This project was initially planned all the way back in 1937 and remained in development hell for 75 years. Frozen is honestly so different from the Snow Queen that it would take an entire video to explain every single change they made to the original fairy tale. In fact, Disney even wrote in the credits that Frozen is inspired from the Snow Queen instead of the usual based on. Now, usually in my fairy tale videos, the Disney film is released first, with many movies trying to either copy the look of the Disney characters or their story elements. However, this isn't really the case here, but I will argue that Frozen caused other companies to either want to make movies about the Snow Queen or place the Snow Queen in their lineup of fairy tale characters when they usually wouldn't do so. Ever After High. So the fairy tale of the Snow Queen is actually an interesting case for Ever After High because the entire story plays out in one of their TV specials. In Epic Winter, the daughter of the Snow Queen, Crystal Winter, has to find a cure for her father, the Snow Queen's kindness blindness curse, by creating a bouquet of roses from each of the 4 seasons. Now, I've watched this special many times before reading the fairy tale, and I'm so pleasantly surprised with how the writers at Mattel were able to keep many of the fairy tale's plot elements, but making it fit into the context of Ever After High. For example, instead of shards of glass coming from the devil, they come from the evil queen's broken mirror. Now, while I can for sure say that nothing here directly copies Disney's Frozen, I know for a fact the only reason why the Ever After High writers dedicated an entire special to the Snow Queen's story was to piggyback a bit off Frozen's success. The Fairytaler. Just like always, the Fairytaler once again provides one of the most accurate retellings of its source material with their version of the Snow Queen. And also, just like always, the show will get rid of the fairy tale's religious elements, such as changing the devil to be a hobgoblin who instead shatters the mirror because he was feeling mischievous. Now, one thing that was just utterly bizarre to me about this episode was that they added this plot to the story where the Snow Queen needed Kai to solve this puzzle so that he can break her curse. And then once he does, the Snow Queen suddenly transforms into a fairy Rapunzel. It's honestly such a shame because on paper, it's actually a pretty interesting plot addition, but visually it looks a bit ridiculous. Happily Ever After, Fairy Tales for Every Child. This version of the Snow Queen changes the setting from Scandinavia to an Inuit village in Canada. But besides that, there aren't really that many differences to the original story. I mean, the 2 kids are still named Kay and Gerda, which definitely aren't Inuit. Regardless though, this episode cuts Gerda's quest short and instead has her end up straight in the robber's hands. I will, however, give this episode credit because I really like the ending where Gerda throws a shard of ice at the Snow Queen, causing her to melt. I'm actually pretty surprised that none of the other entries on this list even played with that idea. Martin Gates Productions. So in 1995, Martin Gates Productions made their own version of the Snow Queen and somehow had the budget to afford Dame Helen Mirren to play the titular character, but I digress. In this film, Kay and Gerda aren't friends, but instead are a brother and sister named Tom and Ellie. Also, instead of the mirror being created by the devil, the Snow Queen constructs a giant magic mirror to reflect the sun's rays away from the earth so that the entire world will become her kingdom. However, when the mirror shatters, 2 of its pieces land in Tom's heart and eye. The Snow Queen then kidnaps Tom to get these pieces, and since she knows he has a love of puzzles, believes he can help her put the broken mirror back together again. All in all, I did enjoy some of the changes to the original story, especially with the motives of the Snow Queen and the old women Ellie meets. But after a while, I found this movie to become a bit boring. It tried really hard to have like both an animal sidekick and goofy villains, but neither of those characters interested me. Also, this movie does have a sequel, but I don't really care enough to watch it. Regal Academy. The Snow Queen is the main villain for the 2nd season of Regal Academy. In the show, her goal is to trap the 6 great fairy tale kingdoms inside of her magical snow globe collection. Now, the Snow Queen actually has a daughter named Kira, who she sends to Regal Academy, but has her pretend to be the granddaughter of Jack Frost. Throughout the season, the 2 of them work together as the Snow Queen is unable to attack Regal Academy due to its magical eternal spring barrier. The Snow Queen is eventually able to trap the 6 families inside of her snow globes, but Rose and her friends set them free, and the series ends with the Snow Queen and Kira becoming stuck inside of a snow globe themselves, vowing to take their revenge. Soyuzmultfilm. Soyuzmultfilm is an animation company that was founded in Russia in 1936. In 1957, they created their own version of the Snow Queen, which was heavily inspired by the animation style and technique used by Disney around the same time. Now, watching the movie for myself, I can clearly tell where the similarities lie in both the animation and the movie's ending. It's almost like this film is a Disney copycat, but in the best way possible. Regardless though, the Snow Queen follows the original fairy tale very closely, but the biggest change is the mirror backstory. In the movie, the Snow Queen is watching Kay and Gerda through her mirror and overhears Kai joke about how he would melt her on a hot stove. She gets so pissed that she breaks her mirror and enchants the mirror splinters to fly around the world into the hearts and eyes of those who have offended her. Now, one thing that really bothers me about this film, though, is the way in which the Snow Queen was animated. In this movie, the Snow Queen is the only character who is animated through a technique called rotoscoping, which is essentially when animators trace over live-action footage. But for some reason, her movements come across so stiff and unnatural to me, I would actually believe that the opposite was true. Also, something that's really unimportant but I find funny is that the way Gerda says please sounds exactly like Jennifer Coolidge.
Please.
The Triplets. In this version of the Snow Queen, the queen has a magical lake that reflects images like a mirror. However, when the bored witch creates a fire, it unfortunately melts a snowman statue that falls onto the mirror and smashes it. One of the pieces flies into Kay's eye, and the Snow Queen kidnaps him, forcing him to repair her broken mirror. In the end, though, the Triplets and Gerda are able to rescue him and break the Snow Queen's spell. In all honesty, this episode was really boring, and I truly feel like none of the plot changes made in this version of the story are even worth bothering to mention. WizArt Animation. WizArt Animation is a Russian company that 1 year before Frozen released their version of the Snow Queen. Now, upon its release, this movie was apparently applauded in Russia, with many saying it was a return to the golden age of Russian animation. However, if you go onto Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has a score of 0%, and in all honesty, I'm not surprised. Not only was the film super boring, but the animation is pretty terrible, with the characters moving in such strange and bizarre ways. Now, just like many entries on this list, the movie makes a variety of changes to the original Fairytale. In this film, the Snow Queen is bitter towards other wizards because she was mocked as a child for having magical powers, so she sends her Northwind spell to go and kill Kay and Gerda's father when they are both young children. And in the end, the Snow Queen is defeated by gazing at a reflection in Gerda's mirror, which transforms her back into her younger self. Now, this movie actually has 4 sequel films, with the most recent one featuring a princess who bears a striking resemblance to a young Elsa. However, I refuse to watch any of these movies, and I guess I'll never know how the Snow Queen randomly appears again in the sequels if she was turned into a child at the end of the first film. Wolves, Witches, and Giants. So again, Wolves, Witches, and Giants is a British kids series in which one of those 3 stock villains will fill in for a character in a bunch of different fairy tales. This version of the Snow Queen is played by the witch, who somewhat changes her appearance to fit the more wintry aesthetic. Due to its short runtime, this episode totally eliminates the character of Gerda and instead has Kay begin to cry after being berated by the Snow Queen, which causes him to dislodge the mirror shard out of his own eye. In the end, Kay ends up tricking the Snow Queen into flying inside of a volcano, which I originally found to be very strange. Then I remembered in the original Fairytale, the Snow Queen is actually gone when Gerda visits Kay in her castle, because she is out visiting the volcanoes of Mount Etna and Mount Vesuvius. Alright, so now it's time for the rankings. Number 11 is Wolves, Witches, and Giants. To be honest, none of the Snow Queens are bad on this list, but this Snow Queen is just kind of the worst. I think this show is really creative, but I don't really like the animation or how the characters fill in for each other. And the Snow Queen here is just a winter rehash of the Wicked Witch old character. Number 10 is the Triplets. The character designs in this show are always typically pretty awful, especially for the adults. However, I will say that I think this Snow Queen had some pretty unique and cool powers. Number 9 is Happily Ever After, Fairy Tales for Every Child. I love Eartha Kitt, but everything about this Snow Queen, from the look to the personality to even the way she carries herself, feels like a cheap imitation of Yzma. Her song is kind of good though. Number 8 is the Fairytaler. The Snow Queen here probably best represents the sort of morally ambiguous nature of the character, because the other entries on this list will either make her a villain or a hero. But the reason why I placed her so low in the rankings is just because that stupid fairy transformation really ruined it for me. Genuinely, whose horrid idea was this? Number 7 is Barbie in the pink shoes. Honestly, her look is a 10 out of 10. I think the ice shards in her hair are one of the most unique fairy tale designs I've ever seen. My problem though is I'm still asking myself, why exactly is she here? Her placement in the movie is just so random. Number 6 is Martin Gates Productions. Again, her look is great and I absolutely love Helen Mirren. My issue though is if the Snow Queen is a villain, I want to feel intimidated, and here I feel close to nothing. However, I'll give her some points for having the best character design on this list. Number 5 is WizArt Animation. Apart from the bad animation, I did really like how intimidating the Snow Queen was in this movie. I think her design is very beautiful, and I believe Sydney Robinson did an excellent job with her voice acting. My problem though again is I didn't really like her transformation into a young child, and honestly found that plot to be pretty uninteresting interesting overall. Number 4 is Regal Academy. The Snow Queen was an excellent choice of villain for the second season of Regal Academy. I love how powerful she is and how she traps her enemies inside of snow globes. This storyline really adds to her overall menacing and threatening aura. But the main issue I have is with her character design. I feel like the Snow Queen should be somewhat of a sexy witch type, and instead the designers went with the overused old witch look, which is a bit strange because the Snow Queen is Kira's mother and not her grandmother. So I guess you can say she waited a long time to have kids. Number 3 is Soyuzmultfilm. Even though I'm not crazy about her animation, I can't deny how scary the Snow Queen appears in the film. I feel like whenever she's on screen, her eyes are piercing like straight into my soul. I think her design is also very beautiful, but I will say that her defeat was so pathetic. Gerda literally just wishes her away at the end of the movie and she disappears. Was that really the best thing the writers of this movie could come up with? Number 2 is Ever After High. People are probably gonna hate me because I put Crystal Winter so high on this list, but honestly, I don't really care. Her design isn't the most interesting, and she has a bit of a bland personality. However, I really enjoyed this TV special, and I really related to her story about having to grow up, because at the time of this special's release, I too had a lot of growing up to do, even though I knew how to tie my own shoes. Regardless though, I really like Crystal Winter and her cool snow on, even if I'll always wonder who that background character was supposed to be. Number 1 is Disney. Once again, Disney took a somewhat ordinary fairy tale character and made her into an even bigger household name. Elsa is the perfect Snow Queen. Her backstory and character design are so fantastic. I absolutely love her voice actress. I've been a fan of Adele Dazeem since she played Elphaba in Wicked. I'm just so happy that the writers at Disney really spent years and years trying to perfect her character because it definitely shows. My only complaint though would be that I think her ice powers are a bit too diverse and convenient, if that makes any sense. If you liked this video today and want to see more content in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will see you soon. Bye!